A 71-year-old pilot with 31,000 hours of flight time, airline transport rating, flight instructor, you name it, ends up making the most basic mistake in all of aviation. His passenger, who happened to be his own brother, dies in the crash. And the cause? Not weather, not mechanical failure, but something so simple that it's almost unbelievable. But here's the thing. The NTSB's fuel exhaustion label doesn't tell the whole story. There are deeper layers here. Bad judgment, overconfidence, and missed chances. And that's what we're going to dig into. The pilot was Kenneth Sager from Hummelstown, Pennsylvania. On paper, this guy looked like the safest set of hands you could ever fly with. Airline, transport pilot certificate, flight engineer, flight instructor, the full alphabet soup. His logbook claimed more than 31,000 total hours, the kind of number that makes younger pilots' jaws drop. He'd flown just about everything, taught others, and been around aviation for decades. But here's the kicker. When it came to this particular airplane, the 1955 Cessna 180 taildragger, Kenneth only had 58 hours in type. Now, if you're not familiar, the Cessna 180 is a completely different animal from your average tricycle gear trainer. It's heavier, has more horsepower, and being a tailwheel, it demands constant attention on the ground and in the air. More importantly, the systems are older, less forgiving, and the fuel management isn't idiot-proof like in modern airplanes. That contrast, 31,000 hours overall, but barely broken in on this one machine, is huge, because experience in aviation isn't a blanket safety net. Every aircraft has its quirks, every model has its traps, and sometimes high-time pilots underestimate those differences because they're used to relying on feel or rules of thumb. That mindset, it can backfire badly. And that's the real setup here. Kenneth wasn't just flying his airplane that day, he was flying his assumptions. And those assumptions were about to be tested. Kenneth started the day at Farmers Pride Airport in Fredericksburg, Pennsylvania. He fueled the Cessna to capacity, 55 usable gallons. On paper, that's a solid load. The plan was a 3-leg cross-country trip, first up to Pittsfield, Pennsylvania, then down into West Virginia, and finally back home toward Harrisburg. The first leg, about an hour and 20 minutes, went smoothly. He lands at Broken Straw Airport in Pittsfield around 9:30 a.m. And here's where the first little alarm bell should have gone off. He's already burned more than 10 gallons, easy. He's on the ground at a paved airport, fuel is available. But instead of topping off, instead of buying himself extra margin, he chooses not to. That was a choice, and a risky one. Second leg. He launches out of Pittsfield and heads south to a private grass strip in Rollsburg, West Virginia. Another 1.2 hours in the air. But this time, when he lands, there is no fuel service at all. So unlike Pittsfield, where he skipped by choice, here he literally can't. The option isn't there, and now he's locked in. He's burned at least 20 gallons, maybe more with climbs, and he hasn't replaced a drop. By the time he departs Rollsburg on that third and final leg, he's rolling the dice with very little wiggle room. And this is what drives me crazy. You can see how this trap builds step by step. It's not like he suddenly forgot to fuel. It's a chain. First he skips at Pittsfield because maybe he thought he didn't need it. Then he lands somewhere that doesn't even have fuel because now he doesn't want to reroute. And suddenly he's halfway home with tanks running down and no margin left. This right here is why fuel exhaustion accidents are so insidious. They don't look like one big mistake in the moment. They're a series of small, seemingly reasonable decisions until you zoom out and realize he's basically boxed himself into a corner. And once you're there, all it takes is one headwind, one extra minute in climb, one hesitation, and you've crossed the line from tight to empty. By the time Kenneth was heading north out of West Virginia, the math was already working against him. He had one more major chance to break the chain, Carlisle Airport, Pennsylvania. And here's where things really sting. He thought about it. He literally considered landing there for fuel. But then he dismissed the idea because he wasn't sure if fuel was available. That sounds cautious, right? But the reality? Carlisle did have fuel that day. He could have stopped, topped off, and his brother would likely still be alive. Instead, he pushed forward toward Capital City Airport, near Harrisburg. By then, he had to know he was on fumes because he actually declared a diversion. But that diversion came way too late. Witnesses on the ground described the sound, the engine sputtering, coughing, coming back briefly, then cutting out again. That's the audio of a fuel-starved engine, not a failing one. He managed to line up with runway 8 at Capital City. The airport was right there, but the fuel simply wasn't. The Cessna ran out of what little was left, and the airplane dropped short, smashing into the ground about a mile from the runway. To make it even worse, it collided with a utility bucket truck parked at the Pennsylvania Turnpike Toll Plaza. His brother Lawrence, who had trusted Kenneth with his life, didn't survive the impact. And that's the real tragedy here. This crash wasn't about one mistake. It was about 3 very clear decision points that went ignored. Skipping Pittsfield, accepting a stop with no fuel in Rollsburg, and then waving off Carlisle when it was right there. None of those single moments guaranteed disaster, but together they stacked into a wall he couldn't climb over. That's the cruel part about aviation accidents. They're usually not sudden failures. They're the final link in a long chain of small, preventable choices. When investigators combed through the wreckage, what they found confirmed exactly what the witnesses had heard. The tanks were essentially dry. The right tank held maybe a pint, less than a soda bottle. The left tank? Completely empty. The fuel lines between the selector and carburetor had only trace amounts left. And that's it. They pulled the engine, bolted it to a test stand, and ran it. It fired up and ran smooth. No mechanical issues, no clogged filters, nothing unusual. That ruled out any mystery failure. The truth was plain. The airplane had simply run out of gas. Now here's where the numbers really tell the story. The investigators estimated that over the course of the day, Kenneth's Cessna had burned at least 52.5 gallons. And remember, the airplane only had 55 usable. That's already too close for comfort. But once you factor in the real-world burn rate, climbs pulling around 16.5 gallons per hour, plus 3 engine starts and takeoffs, he was guaranteed to overshoot the safe margin. And this is where the regulations come in. Under FAR 91.151, if you're flying VFR during the day, you don't just need enough fuel to get to your destination. You need 30 extra minutes of fuel reserve. That's not just a suggestion, that's the law. Kenneth didn't just miss the reserve requirement. He essentially launched his final leg with 0 margin. That's not just cutting it close, that's gambling with your passenger's life. And what's crazy here is how it shows the danger of oversimplification. He was leaning on that tidy 12 gallons an hour cruise figure. But real-world flying isn't neat. Climb, taxi, variations in mixture setting, all of that pushes the number up. Fuel planning isn't about averages, it's about margins. It's about asking, what happens if things don't go exactly the way I planned? And Kenneth didn't leave himself an answer to that question. So, what do we take away from this? First, the personal side. This was a brother flying with his brother. A family trip, probably casual, probably routine, but routine is where complacency creeps in, and in aviation, complacency can kill. It's heartbreaking to think how quickly a simple oversight shattered that trust in the cockpit. Second, the professional lesson. This accident wasn't about skill. Kenneth had plenty of skill. He knew how to fly, he knew how to handle an airplane. What he lacked that day was discipline. The discipline to verify fuel at each stop. The discipline to obey the reserve requirement. The discipline to divert when you still have options, not when you're already desperate. And on a broader level, this case screams about 2 common killers in aviation. Overconfidence bias. The, I've flown 31,000 hours, I know what I'm doing mindset. It makes you think you can bend the margins and get away with it. Get home-itis. That urge to push just a little farther instead of stopping because you're so close to being done. It's extremely frustrating because those 2 mental traps are responsible for accident after accident after accident. And we still see them play out. Fuel exhaustion remains one of the top causes of GA accidents, and the truly crazy part, it is 100% preventable. You don't need fancy avionics. You don't need new technology. You just need planning, discipline, and respect for the numbers. And that's the thought I'll leave you with. Airplanes don't care about your logbook. They don't care about how many certificates you've got or how many people you've trained. The only thing they care about is whether you respected the limits. If you don't, they'll remind you in the harshest way possible. What do you think caused this crash? Overconfidence or just bad decisions stacking up? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.